how does JavaScript send an HTTP request to the backend and receive response from the backend? The technology behind this is called AJAX, AJAX. It stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. This name is misleading because you don't have to use XML. In fact, we always use JSON instead of XML. So it really should be called AJAX. It is a front-end technology. AJAX is not a single technology, but rather a collection of technologies. It includes HTML and CSS. And the programming language is JS, because that's the language for the front end. In AJAX, there is a built-in object called XML HTTP request, or XHR. We use this object to send HTTP request and receive HTTP response. You can also use the new fetch function. Last but not least, AJAX is using JSON or XML or plain text or HTML. Any data format can be used, but JSON is the most popular one. Think about the example I introduced in previous videos, Google search suggestions. So when user types something in the input box, for example, FOTB, JS will be using AJAX technology to send asynchronously to the server side. So AJAX interactions are initiated by JS code. When the interaction is complete, JS can use DOM to update HTML source of the page. For example, add 10 suggestions under the input box in Google search. And the changes are made immediately without requiring an entire page refresh. So this is totally different from JSP because the update is made on the front end, not on the back end. AJAX is a developer stream because you can use AJAX to read data from a web server after the page has loaded, update parts or portion of the web page without reloading the entire page. And of course, we can use AJAX to send data from front end to back end. Before we dive into various ways to make AJAX request in JavaScript, I want to show you a very quick AJAX demo. In this demo, we're going to rewrite or refactor a previous program called user servlet 4. We wrote this program when we learned JSP. So if you forget this, make sure you check JSP demo project. Basically, what happened is when user make a request to localhost 8080 JSP demo user servlet 4, this servlet will prepare 50 users, add it to a request, and forward this request to a JSP page. And this JSP page will output an entire HTML page and return to the front end. So this is not decoupled because front end is strongly coupled with the back end. So we're going to rewrite this. We're going to implement the front end using AJAX, and the back end only provide JSON data that includes the 50 users. So before we rewrite, let's briefly take a look at the old program, the previous program in JSP demo. So in this servlet, we find users. There are 50 users in this list. We add it to request, and we forward this request to users.jsp. In users.jsp, what we did is we're using JSTL and EL expressions to list the 50 users. But this is not AJAX. So next, we're going to rewrite this using AJAX in a project called AJAX demo. In this demo, I renamed user-servlet4.java to find all servlet.java because this name is more self-explanatory than user-servlet4. Before we start programming, I think it's better to show you a picture that illustrates the complete process of making a front-end request, AJAX request, to the back-end Tomcat server. In this picture, as a client on the browser side or front-end side, we're making a request using this URL, AJAX demo find all. Tomcat server will direct this request to the correct servlet, in this case, findAllServlet.java. This servlet does all the work. It gets data from database, in this case, retrieve 50 users, and then converts them or serializes them to JSON data format. In the end, the servlet will send all the data back to the browser. Please note, only JSON data, aka the 50 users, gets transmitted back. This is very different from JSP. We're not sending an entire HTML page back. This greatly saves a lot of bandwidth because we don't have to send various HTML tags like table, div, p, a, td, tr, th back, only the data. Next, let's take a look at findAllServlet. And when we're done with that, we're going to look at how we implement the front-end request we made in users.html. So I'm going to open my IntelliJ. We're now under AJAX demo project, and there is a package called servlets. There are many servlets, but for now, we're only interested in findAllServlet. In this servlet, the first step, we're getting all the users from database. However, to save time, I'm not going to implement a real database access. I'm calling this method, and this method would automatically generate 50 users for me. I'm going to save all those 50 users in an array list. Next, I'm going to create an instance of a class called result. And we're going to set status to 200, set message to find all user success, and set data to user list. Let's take a look at this result class. It is under domain together with user. So if we double click, and you can see the definition of a result class. There are three important private fields in this result class. The first one is status. It's an integer. It can be 200, it means success, or 400, it means client-side error, or 500 means server-side error. The message is a string that explains or describes the meaning of status. So the first two are very simple. The third one is the most important one because this is the payload. This is the data that the front end requests, in this case, the 50 users, in the form of an array. In a different scenario, if a front end requests only one user, then we're going to get one user from database and put this one user in data. So anyway, data is the data that front end requests. Because we do not know in advance the type of this data, so we make the type object, which is the most abstract data in Java. So once we pack everything in this result bin, so you can think of this as one object that has three information: status code, description of this status code, and the payload. Then we're going to use a class from Jackson package. It's called object mapper. And we're going to use mapper.writeValue as string to serialize this instance into a JSON string, and use write method from writer of response to write it back to the browser. Okay, let me remind you, now we're done with the backend. Now we're going to the front end. So in users.html, we're going to learn how to make AJAX request and how do we handle the response. So under web, there is a file called users.html. So in this HTML file, there is a table. But this table is incomplete because the table only have one row with 3 columns: name, age, and birthday. Now we're supposed to populate this table with 50 users we get from the backend. But initially, we don't have any data, so it's an empty HTML. Later on, once we get the data from the backend, we're going to use JavaScript to populate this table body here. Let's take a look at how do we make a request and how we handle the response. So this is JavaScript. So the first one is a variable that points to an empty object. So we're going to use this to store the response. And once the window gets loaded, this function gets executed. And this function, we're making an AJAX call using one of the most popular JS AJAX library called Axios, AJAX iOS. So if I scroll up, at the beginning, we have already downloaded this library under JS right here. And we're importing it into the current page so we can use this Axio object. And we're making a GET request, and this is the request URL. In this .then method, this response represents the response from the find-all servlet, and the response.data gives us the JSON string of the result instance, and we're going to save it in the predefined variable result, and we're going to print it to the console. All right, let me launch my program, and I'm going to make this request. So I'm going to press enter. Now, before I do that, I'm going to press F12 to show you the console. So let me clean the console. When I press enter, this page shows the result in JSON format. Now, this is not very beautiful, so I'm going to beautify it, copy it, and paste it into JSON formatter to format it. Press process, and we can see this JSON. Response.data returns us the JSON string of result. And if you remember that in result, we have 3 private fields: status, message, and data. And data is the payload. It has 50 users. If I expand it, I can see this is the first user, second user, third user, and so on. All right. Now, once we get the result in here, now I'm pretty sure every student knows how to use JavaScript to dynamically create 50 TR, because each TR corresponds to 1 row, and 1 row corresponds to 1 user. So this can be left as a homework.